New Breakpoint. Hello everyone, welcome to the first ever episode of New Breakpoint. My name's Simon Waite. I'm really excited to be here today. Now you might be wondering what New Breakpoint is. We had some interesting journeys into today's episode just at the last minute with some nice hardware failure, but hey, we're developers, we keep on going with whatever we get in front of us. So New Breakpoint is a show for developers by developers where we have the chance to run the debugger over interesting developer cloud topics and developer topics with a range of guests. The show will be live streamed 3 times a month right here, and we'll have occasional special broadcasts such as the one that we have coming up at Microsoft Ignite in 3 weeks. We aim to keep each episode under 20 minutes so you can easily fit it into your day. So why should you watch New Breakpoint? Why do you want to hang around? Why catch this episode and future episodes? Well, the goal for New Breakpoint is to help you discover and connect with other devs in Australia and in fact across the world and to learn about what's going on in the industry. We'll explore a range of content, not just necessarily Microsoft Azure and Microsoft developer technology, but all developer technology. And in fact, we'll have some interesting community sessions coming up in a couple of weeks. And then finally, really it's about helping you upskill. Finding new ways to develop yourself personally and professionally and make connections both with new developer communities and with new toolkits and technologies as well. Today's episode will be focused on Python, and I'll be joined in a moment by Anthony Shaw, who's a senior cloud developer advocate here at Microsoft to run us through a super cool demo. Because we're streaming, we have the ability to take your questions live. So please feel free to either drop comments in alongside the video on YouTube if you're watching there, or to tweet us on the Microsoft AU Dev Twitter handle, both during the episode and later after the episode's finished, if you've got any questions to us, and we'll be sure to answer them or route them to the guests who can answer them for you. Finally, we want everyone to feel welcome when they come onto the New Breakpoint community. So please take a moment to review our code of conduct, which you can find linked there on the screen and which will be in our debug log with the episode once we publish it. And please ensure that you understand your commitment to your fellow community members and what we're asking you to do when you join us. It wouldn't be a developer show if there wasn't some tools and services for you to install. So you may already have some of these installed or access to them, but if you haven't, go ahead, grab them, install them, or sign up for them. And they're going to allow you to join in with some of the demos that we've got. So Anthony, for example, today has got a repo that you can go and have a look at after the show to have a play with the technology, but we're always going to try and provide that capability for you so you can play along with us at home and get hands-on. You know, us talking about it's one thing, but actually having the ability to get hands-on is where I do the most learning, I find. I haven't listed all of the programming languages we're ever going to have on the show here because it would be a very long list. And we're not limiting ourselves to only a select number of languages. So expect a range of content to come up. Today we're talking about Python. Next week we're going to have a little bit of Python as well. So, you know, this month we're probably talking about Python more than any other language, but it's not the only thing we're going to cover. All right, that's the intro out of the way for today's show. Today I'm joined by Anthony Shaw, as I mentioned up top, who's the Senior Cloud Advocate here at Microsoft, who focuses on open source, and he's going to be talking to us today about Python. Python's a rich programming language that has a lot of use cases. Now, you may be familiar with it, but if you're not, you can use it for a range of different solutions. You can build web applications with it. You can build command line based solutions with it. It's really big in the Internet of Things or IoT space. And then finally, kind of the go-to space that we see a lot of Python used in today is data science and machine learning. Let me bring Anthony onto the stream so he can say hi to everyone and kickstart his demo. So let me just hop over here and add Anthony. So hi, Anthony.
Hey, everybody.
Can hear you.
Hi.
All right, let me turn off my slides here. Anthony, thanks for joining us today. You want to tell people a little bit about the demo that you're gonna be showing to them?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned Python's kind of use cases as it's really big in the web space, so building web applications. It's also really big in data science. I mean, data science is kind of the big area that's blown up for Python. It's led to its boom in popularity. So what I wanted to show was I think data science really is quite a niche skill set. So what I wanted to demo is actually something a lot simpler than that, which is we've got a spreadsheet. So let's say you're a typical organization who's been managing customer data historically in a spreadsheet on a shared drive somewhere, and you want to do some sort of analytics on that spreadsheet. So what I wanted to demo basically is how Python can be used to load up spreadsheets, do processing of data, and then we're going to link all this stuff together so that it will be run in the cloud, and then actually just end up with a BI at the end.
Cool. So do you want to go ahead and share your screen, and we can add that so folks can see you, what you're doing? And I'll remove myself so that it's just you in control of New Breakpoint. Exciting.
Okay. All right.
All right, let's add that to the stream. Wow.
Does this work?
Spreadsheets. Look at that. Everyone's favorite tool, Excel. It's Turing complete. I saw such a tweet about it yesterday saying that you can now write your own functions inside of Excel. Anyway, let's not talk about that. Yeah, it's a tool of many possibilities. I'm going to hand over to you, Anthony. I'll be back in a few minutes, but over to you, and everyone enjoy the demo. It's pretty awesome.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Simon. All right, so the situation we've got set up here is that we have a spreadsheet, and in a lot of these types of demos, they are pre-created examples of customer data, and the demos are all nice and clean. The data is nice and clean and useful. This is a real-world example. I pulled this spreadsheet from data.gov.au, which is the Australian government's kind of open data platform. This is actually a copy of the Australian Charities Register. So they have an annual report called the AIS, which comes out every year. This is the 2013 data set, which I pulled. I think since 2013, they've done quite a lot of work to improve it and clean it up. But kind of what I pictured here was that this is kind of like a spreadsheet that represents some customer information. So just looking through this spreadsheet in Excel, there's nothing fancy about this particular tool, but I noticed a whole bunch of things that really needed fixing. So for example, the postcode is mostly populated, but the state isn't always populated. So one of the tasks I think we need to do to clean up the data here is to actually work out what the state is. Something else I noticed is that they've got all these columns which are sort of like tags to represent. So for example, operates in SA, assume means that they operate in South Australia. And then people have ticked that as a yes or a no. Something else is that the right over here, they've also got sort of number of hours that they're reporting against and the number of staff that they have populated and stuff like that. So kind of this spreadsheet as it stands, if you uploaded this directly into Power BI, you'd probably end up with a bit of a mess, to be honest, because not all the data is populated correctly. There's a lot of inconsistencies. I also noticed when I went through here that in some of the postcodes, instead of the number 0, they'd use the letter O. So if you do just try and give it to a mapping service and stuff like that, it just breaks. So yeah, this is kind of my more realistic example of a customer data set that's been managed on a spreadsheet, which just means it's full of user errors. So kind of step one for this was to use a tool called Pandas. So Pandas is an open source project which is designed for doing data science, and it has different concepts to Excel. Kind of the main concept is something called a data frame, which is similar to a sheet, I guess, in Excel. And actually what you can do in Pandas is to load up an Excel spreadsheet and actually convert it into a data frame. So what I've done with this example is I've started off with something called a Jupyter Notebook. You can install the Jupyter Notebook extension to VS Code. And then in VS Code, you can basically write Python code directly in your Jupyter Notebook. And then if you just press this icon here, it will execute that code. So my first sample was to read the Excel spreadsheet that I downloaded and replace any of the letter Y's. So that was here where you see people have ticked it as yes. That would then be true. So we're going to assume that Y means true, and then N, for some reason in lowercase, I don't know why they did that, means no. The other thing I pointed out was that the postcodes were a bit all over the place, not always populated, or sometimes the state wasn't populated. So I wrote a simple function in Python, which takes a numeric postcode and then returns the state that it belongs to. I just looked up on Wikipedia a list of all the Australian postcode ranges and which state they belong to, and just put this simple function together. So this is a simple Python function that says, if it's between these ranges, return the correct state code. And also that little trick I found, people putting the letter O instead of the number 0. So that's kind of going to be the next thing we can do to clean up this spreadsheet a bit. Another thing I found in the spreadsheet was that some of the entries had no ABN associated. So I'm going to drop all the rows with no ABN. We're then going to fix the town city. So in some cases, the town city column is in all uppercase. Sometimes it's in title case like this. Sometimes it's in lowercase. This is typical spreadsheet. It's just kind of all over the place. There's no consistency. So I'm going to basically just apply a function to make all of the town names title case. And then for all the reporting hours, if it's blank, replace it with the number 0 so that if I do any analytics or anything, then it will process that correctly. And then the next thing is just to go through all of these columns here where it's Y, and just assume that if it's blank, that's actually going to be false. So I've just listed all the columns, just loop over them, and then if they are blank, then replace them with a false constant. And then lastly, apply the map to complete the state field based on the postcode. In some cases, I also found that the state was actually wrong. Either the state was wrong or the postcode was wrong, but either way, update the state to what is being calculated as being the correct state. So in the Jupyter extension for VS Code, like I said, if you execute that, it will show you the output live in here. So you can see all the rows that come out of this directly in VS Code. So at the moment, I'm just working locally. And if I see anything else that I want to clean up, for example, the address line 2 column is a bit messy. And there are some other things potentially I could do in the future. The other thing I picked up on is that it would be great to be able to map these charities across Australia. So I found an open data set called AU Postcodes. This is just a CSV that's available on GitHub, and there's a link in the repository. It lists postcode, the town name, the state code, and then also the latitude and longitude. So, where it is in terms of the coordinates on the planet, and then an accuracy metric as well to say like how specific it is. If you go into sort of more rural places, then the postcodes can cover massive areas, whereas in the cities, a postcode can be quite small. So that kind of gives you an idea. What I really wanted to do with this is just for each of the rows that had a postcode and a town name, or even just the postcode, then to add the latitude and longitude columns to the data set. So that's kind of the last thing I did, is to merge the two data sets together. So the original one and then the postcode data, so the CSV file here, and join it based on the postcode and town on the original data set, and then the postcode and place name in this data set. And then once we've done that, we can lose all the extra fields because we don't need those. And we end up with a new spreadsheet, which has got latitude and longitude as the final columns. So that's kind of the summary of where we got with this Jupyter notebook. So I think in terms of the workflow, it's quite useful to write this stuff locally, test it out locally. There's a lot of trial and error putting these sorts of things together. But once you've got a an output that you were happy with. What I then wanted to do was to connect this together so that it's not, I mean, at the moment it's in a Jupyter notebook on my computer, and that's not very useful because this customer data changes all the time. This particular database, the most recent one, changes every week. So it's not practical for me as a developer for somebody to email me the new spreadsheet every week, or for me to have to go on the website and download a new copy. So what I thought made more sense instead was to set up a shared resource on Azure Storage, and then basically convert this Jupyter notebook into an Azure function. So an Azure function is a small piece of code. Literally, it can just be a function supporting a number of different languages, Python included. And the function basically is triggered by something that's happened. You can do it as a trigger via HTTP. So you can send a HTTP request to your function and it will run the code. Or it can be triggered by a blob store changing. So for example, if you uploaded a file into a blob store, it would trigger the code. Or you can do it based on a schedule. There's a whole range of different triggers. So the next thing I did was to go into Azure and create a function app, and then to pick Python as the target platform for this function app. So let's wait for this to come up. I'm streaming at the same time, and I'm on the NBN. So let's see how good my internet connection is. Apparently not.
Yeah. There's a lot going on your machine, I think.
There's a lot going on my machine. Okay. All right. Well, I've got it in here. So in VS Code, if you have the Azure extension, you can see Azure functions, and you can manage and create Azure functions directly in the IDE. So I've made one called Blob Trigger, and this one's quite simple. It listens to a blob, and it looks in a folder called AIS, which is the Australian standard for this particular database, and it looks out for any new spreadsheets. So if anyone uploads a new spreadsheet into this blob folder, it's going to trigger this file. And this file is going to be my Python script, which has got all the important bits of this Jupyter notebook. So basically all this Python code, it's going to run that Python code for me. So the input is going to be whatever spreadsheet the person uploaded, assuming that's the latest version of this database. And the output is going to be a nice clean data set like we have here. So the actual file itself, again, this is all in the source repository, but it's basically just a function, where are we, called main. And it takes an input, which will be the stream of data that comes from the new upload. And I'm going to use the same code that I used in my Jupyter notebook to read the Excel spreadsheet. But instead of reading it from my local computer, it's going to read that byte stream and interpret it as an Excel spreadsheet. And then I'm going to download that postcode database that I mentioned earlier. Then run the same pandas commands that I had in the Jupyter notebook. I just copied and pasted these across. And then lastly, and this is the important bit, now that we've got the actual clean data, to put it somewhere where we can reuse it. So lots of different options here. We could deploy SQL Server into Azure. We could run Postgres or MySQL. We could use Cosmos DB. But this isn't really a sort of high-end production database. And I just wanted to go with the absolute most simple solution. I mean, it's currently running in an Excel spreadsheet, which isn't, high scale either. So the intention here was, okay, what's the simplest and actually probably the cheapest way of us running this on the cloud? So an Azure Table Store, which again you would use in Azure Storage. So basically, what the last step of this will do is to convert my pandas data frame, which is the output, basically, to batch it up into groups of 100 rows, because the actual production database of this, I think the 2017 one is about 100,000 rows. I mean, it's quite a big spreadsheet, so don't try and upload all 100,000 at once. Batch it up into smaller components. and then basically upload that to Azure Table Store. So that's the last part of this demo, is to then basically just take the output of this pandas execution and then to upload it into Table Store. So if you have the Azure Storage Explorer installed, you can see the blob container I used for uploading a new version of the spreadsheet. And you can also see the table output. So this is the output once the function has run, and it'll have, again, it's my internet's pushing it again. It will have all the latest data that came out of the Azure function, including the latitude and longitudes and all of the mappings that I did from the pandas function. So basically the input now is just upload the newer copy of the file into this blob, which potentially, an admin could do, or you could even just make it a shared drive. So if I upload the 2015 database, then that will trigger the Azure function to run all my Python code, clean up whatever spreadsheet I just uploaded, and then basically just upload that to Table Store as being the latest copy. And then finally, what I've done for this demo is to connect this Table Store to Power BI. So the last part is, in Power BI, you can have a data set and you can connect it to Azure Table Storage. So in this case, I've just created a really simple report, which basically just connects into that table store, so the ACN table. And you can see here all the columns that I got from the spreadsheet. All of the information and stuff has been cleaned up. And also it had the latitude and longitude data. So in this case, I'm going to use one of the GIS maps to sort of represent all of the information that was in that spreadsheet originally with the cleaned up postcodes on a map. And then I can do whatever slicing I need to do. So if I want to filter by, for example, the type of charity or the size of charity, then I could drop, this in here, for example, and say, show me all the large charities. And as you expect, they're all kind of clustered around the main cities. So yeah, that's the demo.
Super cool. Super cool, Anthony. Thank you very much for that. It's good to see you suffered some sort of demo god issue there with the portal not loading. It's always a challenge. And there we are, folks. You can see we're live. No smoke and mirrors here. I think for me, the joke I always refer to in this sort of scenario is, you can tell when someone's an integration developer because they're the only person in the room who's happy when a text file automatically gets created in a folder after something's being executed. So I think those sort of folks would be really excited to see this sort of solution where you can take a file, drop it into a storage account, have an event triggered, which then runs a piece of code. And the fact that you can also develop it in a familiar environment like a Jupyter Notebook, and then lift that code pretty much wholesale into a Python Azure function and have it run as expected is awesome. And it's actually interesting. The folks we have on next week have a slight variation on a theme, so they're doing something very similar. But that was an amazing demo. Thank you very much, Anthony, for joining us today. First guest on first ever show. So I think really want to thank you for stepping up and joining us today. The link to Anthony's repo showed on the screen a few times during his demo, but it is available in our log. So I will say thanks, Anthony, and we'll have a chat again in future. Thanks a lot for your time today.
All right. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. All right. So that was Anthony Shaw. What an amazing demo. I really appreciate him stepping up and doing that for us today. So let's bring it home. Let's wrap it up. So what did we talk about today? Well, we introduced New Breakpoint. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. I've certainly enjoyed bringing it to you today, and I look forward to the next one next week. We've got more stuff ahead of us. Make sure if you haven't got those tools that I listed before that you download them, so you can go and do things like clone Anthony's repo and have a play yourself. You can run Azure Functions locally, even if you don't have an Azure subscription, so you can get started with the Visual Studio Code Functions extension really easily on any platform that you might be on. You can check out all the links for the episode, all of the useful information at that link at the bottom of the screen there. So that's our debug log. It'll take you to our GitHub repository where we'll update the run sheet after every episode of the show. So make sure to go and check that out. So as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're doing a special episode in 3 weeks at Microsoft Ignite. It won't be here on our standard live streaming channels. It'll be through the Microsoft Ignite event channel. So if you are interested in coming along to that show, and we have got some really cool content lined up, I'm not going to tell you quite yet what it is, but when we get close to the event, I'll maybe drop some hints. But let's say next generation computing and some interesting ways to get yourself upskilled if you're a developer in the community. Definitely worthwhile going and signing up for Ignite. It's free, runs over sort of 2.5, 3 days here in Australia. We'll have some really interesting stuff. All right, so that's today's episode, folks.